To start this project, we need some input that are relevant to other project processes or phases. First of all, the first input is a risk management plan that is a part of the process itself, but also the scope baseline through which we have to compare the impact of each risk with respect to the scope. We need to make the assessment the risk register, that is the unranked list of all the possible events, not ordered, but just the list. And we have to take care, since of the contest, we have to take care of the enterprise constraint, so the use of the shelf parts, the use of the specific procedures, so all the constraints that are relevant to the organization of the processes or the environment, the culture of the company in which the project developed. All these input are used to make this assessment. The main, of course, information and data, we have to find them in the risk management plan once we have prepared it in the initial phase of the process. The risk management plan gave us the instruction, tell us the way in which we have to conduct all the activities that are relevant to the risk management. And it is tailored to the severity of the risk, as we have said before, and the influence of this event over the project, and the project over the company, the company. Let's have a dive deep, enter in more details in how we have to do this assessment. We have to investigate on the probability, on the likelihood that an event could occur during the project life cycle, and on the potential effect that we will face on the project objectives. How can we investigate? We go through different tools, but mainly they are based on assessment that are done through interview, through meetings with selected participants from the team. They could be experts outside the team, could be external stakeholder, and also the customer too, because the customer could have experience from another supplier some risk event, so that it is not in our list. And so the interview with the customer could be a different point of view with respect to any possible risk that could impact our project objective. During this assessment, we need also to include all the justification, all the assumption that we have done to assess the rule itself. Because since the assumption could change during the life cycle of the project, we need to be able to track back what were the assumptions for which that risk was ranked as a medium severity risk or a low severity risk, and we have to record all these things inside the output of this process, or the main tool of this process, that is our risk register, in which all the risks are listed, are ordered, and are ordered together with all the analysis and the assessment we have done. At the end, this means that we have assessed all the risks of the event according to specific classes of impact and probability, and we will map these risks and these their classes of probability and impact inside a matrix that has two dimensions of the matrix are the impact itself and the probability of occurrence. One of the matrix that is mostly used is the one that is provided by the PMI Institute inside the PMBOK guide that provides a probability impact matrix that is done by 5 different levels or classes of impact on project objectives, so on time, cost, scope or quality, and 5 different levels or classes of probability from 0,1 to 0,90 that represents a class of percentage of occurrence. This matrix is mapped to focus immediately on the most important risk of the project, is mapped by colors. So we have a part of the matrix that is green. In that matrix we collect all the risk that has low impact and whatever kind of probability percentage, but very low influence on our project. And we have sometimes also risks that or events that could affect our project, but with a very low probability of occurrence. This is green. On the other side, we have a red part of the matrix. On the top part of the matrix on the right, this is red. In this part of the matrix, we will map all the risk that has a big impact on our project. They can reduce the scope of the project, or they can lead to a termination of the project itself, a failure of the project or the program. So high impact also with sometimes with small probability, because the impact is so huge that we risk to lose the project itself. And there are also, of course, the risk that has a high probability and severe impact on the project itself. In the middle, there is a part that is yellow, in which there are medium risk. These colored matrix help to focus, first of all, on the red part of the matrices, because we have to consider that inside a project, the leverage are limited, the contingencies, the reserve in terms of money that could be used to manage, to put in place some action to reduce or mitigate the impact of a risk or to reduce the probability of occurrence are limited. So we need to focus first of all on the most important risk in terms of probability of occurrence and of impact on our project. And then we can focus also on medium severity risks, looking at the lower severity risk just in the watching list we mentioned before. In the reality, there is a third dimension of this matrix. We are not dealing with it at the moment, but it is the urgency of the risk. Because once we have mapped the risk in terms of probability of occurrence or in terms of impact, severity of the impact, we need to see at the urgency of the risk. Because even risk that has the same severity in terms of impact and the same probability of occurrence could have a different urgency, and this means that for some of them we have to act immediately. So we do not wait for a dedicated quantitative analysis. We go directly, once we have identified it, it is a urgent risk, it is a high level risk, we act. For the other that are with the same level but less urgent, we can go deeply inside it. How we map at the end? How we fill this matrix? To fill this matrix, we need to help our teams, our experts, to have some references of the classes. So we said that we are not interested in understanding is the probability percentage is 32% or 57%. We want to understand if it's between 10 and 40%. For this reason, we built at the beginning, and we put them inside the risk management plan, we built some reference tables. These reference tables are ordered in terms of levels, different levels of likelihood. For example, negligible, low. I show you some example of this table. This one is divided in 5 levels: negligible, low, medium, high, and very high. Each level is characterized by a class of probability. So from 0 to 1%, from 1% to 30% we consider them low. From 30% to 50%, the risk of probability of occurrence, the risk of the event is considered as a medium. From 50 to 7, high, and over 70%, very high risk. This is a typical reference table in terms of probability that could be has to be found by the team inside the risk management plan. Another kind of table of the same type is the one that divide the risk in according to an index instead of classes, low, medium, high. This is an index from 1 to 4, for example. 1 is risk is considered improbable, less than 10%, 5%. 2 is not very probable, for example, from 10 to 40%, and so on. We arrive to a level index, probability index of 4, when the risk is over 60 or 70%. The problem in assessing the risk, and in particular in assessing the probability of occurrence of an event, is the fact that each of us has a different risk attitude. So some of us are risk seeker, so they live with the risk as a normal work. Some other are risk adverse. Everything, every action, every activities has a risk for these people. So when we make the assessment, we will face the different attitude of the people. So we will have in the team people that are risk seeker, and we will have in the team people that are risk adverse, and they will evaluate the same risk in different classes. But we need to have a weighted measure of this risk. So how can we help the people to have a common understanding of the classes of the risk? We do this with the help of US people that started to understand this issue of the attitude of the risk that is jeopardizing the measurement of the assets of the risks since the beginning, and they started especially in space application. So I show you the example of how NASA solved this issue.